like to start with you, Jeroen. You've explained this many times before, but what I would like to know is, how did the idea of responsible innovation come across? When did it start? When did this new idea show up?
Well, we have to go way back. I try to describe the process a little bit in the introductory to the first volume of the proceedings of this coming out of this conference. And actually, I'm looking at José van Eindhoven of Wagenaar and now Erasmus University, and we were in a group, and this goes way back 2006, and we were thinking about how to 2003 even, it started, we were thinking about a very relevant program for the Dutch Research Council, kind of societally relevant, addressing the problems of our times. And we said it is bound to have something to do with technology, and so we agreed on that. Both of us did, and so we were thinking. We had an ethics and policy program at that time. We said it needs to be explicitly geared towards the high technology challenges and all the social implications that will come with it. And then we had Arie Rip also there, and we started to think about how we could weld all of those different communities together. And then we thought, I don't know exactly how it came about, but we started to think about, we have MVO, which is in Dutch maatschappelijk verantwoord ondernemen. But we need something that is much closer to the technology, that is very close to the innovations where the rubber hits the road. And we need to be there early on in the process. And so we have to relate to those communities, to the engineers, to the applied scientists, so that we can talk to them the moment where they're at the drawing board and they're thinking about their technologies, and have a moral and societal conversation with them, to make them aware, but also to draw their attention to and elicitate some of their creativity, to think about how we can address, and this is a very important notion, address the grand challenges of our time, how we can use technology to help solve some of those problems,
and make it a moral issue, because
a moral issue. Yeah,
because I think that's part of the revolution. Because designers always try to improve things. That's what they do.
Yeah.
But they don't necessarily turn it into a moral obligation of any kind.
Yeah, and of course it's a moot point, because what is the moral truth, and it is a can of worms that we're opening. But we find ourselves in our boat at sea, and we need to repair our boat at sea. So we have to start somewhere, and there are so many of those moral and societal obligations, whether they're about sustainability or about safety and security or about privacy. They're all important. And so we've referred to that as we feel overburdened and overpowered by all those moral and societal obligations. And this is exactly the point, because that's not a problem, that may trigger creativity and innovation, because now we find ourselves in this dire moral situation, this predicament, and we need to innovate ourselves out of the problem. There's no guarantee that there will always be this kind of silver bullet solution to those problems. But it's relative to the stakes, and if the stakes are high, we have an obligation to try to see whether there is that silver bullet. And so some really intriguing solutions have been, and I've mentioned some of in the introduction. The Dutch Fairphone, or and so the structure of those solutions is that they are a solution in one fell swoop for a number of those moral and societal obligations that we're confronted with. Right?
And it often starts with a clash. That's what someone said yesterday in the closing debate, that if there's a clash of interest, if there's a conflict, that's where the innovation usually starts.
Yes, yeah.
Which is an interesting line of thinking.
Yeah, because it's always seen as, there's there are the people who are raised those societal and ethical issues, and that's a problem. Yeah, but it is a problem, but it's also at the same time a trigger to press us more hard on those problems, and to make us work harder on solutions.
I think we can say that it's booming, that the idea is taking off, that it's you hear it more often. Yeah. It's become accepted and even propagated by politicians. There's money, which is important. So it's gaining ground, the idea of responsible innovation.
Yeah. No, I think that since the European Commission has taken this up in 2012, it's really spread, and it helps that there's 500 million approximately available over the course of 10 years for this type of research. It's a meeting place, as you see at this conference. People from different research communities come together, and they find here a common ground to discuss the problems that they're all concerned with. But certainly the money helps, and it also helps to mainstream it. And it becomes, of course, we have seen the Lund Declaration, Sweden, that already said, our applied science and R&D in Europe should be geared towards the grand challenges. And now we had the Rome Declaration, which actually confirmed that and consolidated that idea in Europe. And I hope that other countries, of course, including the Netherlands, will join forces and will make statements to the same effect.
A couple of years ago, the word was sustainability. And there came a time when everybody was sustainable. Even the bakery on the corner was sustainable. The mail delivery was sustainable. My phone company was sustainable. And at the end of it, this sustainable thing, it didn't mean anything anymore. It had become a hollow phrase because everybody was using it. I think that's maybe a risk for responsible innovation as well. How do you keep that from becoming a hollow phrase that is too often used?
Mm-hmm. Well, you're right. I think that is a threat. Therefore, the metrics, the assessment tools that some of the projects now also in the European context are working on to operationalize this wonderful notion, to come up with models and tools is very important. And probably we should also be looking at some standardization and some inclusion or incorporation into standards like ISO or something like that. Because it cannot be the case that you just use these words, wonderful words, and reap the benefits of that without pulling your weight. And so that's, of course, I mean, it may become vacuous or gratuitous, but still you're open, more open than where you're not using the word responsible or sustainable to criticism, because you've put it on the table. And corporations have also experienced this over the course of the last decades. They started to talk about corporate social responsibility. And then when you put that on the table, you are open to criticisms of critical journalists to say, well, actually, this is what you're claiming. Are you actually doing this? You're claiming that you are interested in corporate social responsibility. Actually, show me how you do it in your organization. So you're really vulnerable. So everyone and this applies also mutatis mutandis to this case, when you start to talk about responsibility, then you're open to a certain type of debate or dialogue where you have to be able to follow up on what you've claimed.
To put your money where your mouth is.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Tjerk Wagenaar. To start off, because you are here with two different functions, I would like to start off with the NGO, Nature and Environment. I'm making a cliche, which is not always fair, but before the environmentalists would say, don't take a plane 2 times a year, no matter what. Just go on holiday by bike, or go walking, or maybe use a train, but don't take a plane twice a year. Why would you? There were others who said, people are going to take that airplane anyway. We just need to make sure that the airplane gets cleaner. Now, this is a big change for your NGO. When did this change happen?
Now, first of all, thanks for being here. I like it very much to be in contact with scientists from social sciences, because that's my first point to you, you are very important for what Jeroen also said are the great challenges of our time. The technicians, and then I'm coming back to your question, the technicians are not able to solve our problems. They need definitely you to get everything at the end of the day implemented and being accepted by everyone. And maybe later on this interview we'll work that out a little bit more in detail. But then related to your question, the role of NGOs in society is you have different roles. There are roles of NGOs who would say what's happening now is completely wrong. We have to say no. I was happy to see one of the research projects related to scale gas. And it's very easy to mobilize people by saying no. But on the other hand, if we want to save this planet or want to do the right things with our planet, we have to say yes to a lot of things. And therefore, our view, and that's another NGO view, that's the view of Natuur and Milieu and also some other NGOs, is trying to see what do people really need and how can we make the way they want to behave, they want to live, they want to adhere to their own standards of living, how can we make that in a way possible which is, and then I use this word, sustainable. And you can ask the question, what is then sustainable? If people like to go on holiday, please do it. But if you go then by plane, do it as sustainable as possible. And if it's not possible, for example, with fuels to get it fossil fuel free, then do additional things like do compensational kind of methods, etc. And then I make directly the link to the things Jeroen is saying, because why are people doing these kind of things? Why do they like to do it? Because somewhere near their heart, there's something saying, this is what is right. And then you can talk discussion about what's exactly right, but then you are touching the element of moral values, what makes them tick. Now, and then I can talk a whole long story, but I think the role of NGOs, in fact, our NGO is how can we mobilize society to do the right things? Not by using your finger, but by offering perspectives of dealing and doing different things.
You're talking very positively. I think that's part of your strategy, to talk positively. So you're not saying...
It's also my heart.
But it's not saying what you're doing is wrong. You took an airplane to Spain. What you're doing is saying you did right, but you could do better.
That's in 80% of the case or 90% of the case, that's right.
Now you're here because you're also part of the Committee on Energy from the Topsectors. And what you need to do is to make a bridge between science, company, and society. And to think of a way to innovate the way we use energy to make it more sustainable. Well, we all know the problems that are there, which is, I think, a very difficult task. So what would you want from the people here? And you said the technicians can't solve it, so you probably estimate that these people are not technicians. These people are scientists from the
Is that right or not?
Well, we have all kinds of people here, but there are philosophers amongst us. There are people with whole different backgrounds. There are some technicians, I think, too. There are experts. But why would you want to be here with these people? What do you want from them?
Thanks for the question. What I especially want from you is, now, first of all, use your talents. That's in basically use your talents in a way that it can help to solve the problems of our planet, of our communities. And what I see, and that's, I myself also a technician, I've studied applied physics, but what I realize in this top sector energy is that there are a lot of very clever guys doing all kind of interesting research, but at the end of the day, they are not dealing with the question, how can we get it accepted? How can we make it a business case that people really like and adapt it? And what I like from you in all kind of different things is, please align to different scientists with different disciplines, because you all have to work together to get the real innovations which are needed for our society. And everyone can do it on his own place, can make the steps which are necessary, but please open the doors and go to people who are thinking and acting completely different. Try to understand them, make bridges, because that's, I think, one of the only ways that they also would listen to your insights and your ways why you should innovate and do the things better.
You could also say that's not the point of science. That's not what they are for. They're just there to find the truth. And that is our holy mission, and changing the planet. That's your job.
And what's your question?
Well, the question is that something you should ask of scientists to change the problems of our time, to find a way to business, find a way to society? Should scientists be activists? Should they?
Oh, not at all.
Be entrepreneurs?
No, I would ask the question to everyone. And I would ask everyone in different roles, also the baker on the street corner, what he or she is trying to contribute to the developments which are needed in our society. And if I'm now talking here with a scientist, I'm trying to understand what's your role, where are your talents, and how can you use these talents to bridge to other things to make them much more fruitful for societal developments.
Yeah, to make it a bit more concrete, my name is Vincent Blok, Wagenaar University. You are the head of the Topsector Energy. Can you tell me or tell us what are the specific problems you face where we can contribute to as social scientists?
I can mention three kinds of problems. First of all, the whole issue in Groningen. If there are new infrastructural developments, if we talk about wind, we talk about that kind of things, how can we adapt it? I visited myself one of the hearings in the east of Groningen, and it's really very, very complicated to get the windmills over there done. And the only thing to solve it is the knowledge you have and the research you have done to understand what's happening with the people there. That's one issue. Now, another issue is probably, you all know, is the smart meter. The smart meter is essential for being more aware of what you're doing with your energy. Give people a perspective how to deal with solar energy, to energy savings. But if the technicians talk about the smart meters, they have a kind of procedure how to get the things behind the door. Is that the way of getting things done? The solution is much more related, and that's in fact your field, about what's the X factor? How do you get the things behind the door? What are the dissatisfiers? How do you solve them? And what is the natural moment? I'm thinking now getting more to the science kind of. What are the natural moments of getting it introduced? And if you know, for example, one of the things recently I understand, what is the X factor of getting things behind the door? That's not the man. He's not in charge of decisions. It's the women. So if you don't be aware of the fact that the smart meters get introduced by understanding what are the needs and the desires of women, don't get it done. That's a second element. And a third element is, for example, if you talk to businesses have to have leading roles in their own way of producing stuff. Now, if you have big companies, quite often they behave more or less, I can go more deep, quite rational. But if you talk about the medium-sized, the SME companies, how do we get these changed? How do we get the, how do you call it in English, the tuinders, bijvoorbeeld? What's the tuinders? The greenhouse developers or whatever. How do you get these moved in these directions? And then you should definitely understand the dynamics in these groups. You should know that there are advisors in this area which are crucial for decision making. You should understand that the women, I don't have a very spell for women, but in this case also the women are the dominant player in changing business. Because if the man tries, for example, not to sell the flowers by the market, by directly to a wholesaler, then the women have everywhere a problem if the price for wholesaler is lower than the market. And she's the hero at the moment, the price is higher than the market. But the women should play this role. How do you do it? Understanding dynamics. So these are three elements which I think all of you understand, why you see how critical it is to use social science and humanities and more or not.
Okay, so
but does it make sense?
Okay. There was one question, and then I'll get to your point. Yeah. Please.
Yeah, my name is Rob Lebrink, Wagenaar University. I have a question both for Mr. Jeroen van der Hoven and Mr. Wagenaar. And before I come to my question, I have two observations. Mr. Jeroen van der Hoven, you said in the beginning that the idea behind responsible innovation and how it emerged, it also came more from a technological perspective, and or at least with technologies in the back of the mind. Second observation, what I have is, and that's to the person in the middle, Mr. Wagenaar. You said that if you take a flight, there can be questions with regard to the technologies of the fuels and to what extent that's sustainable. And then if there is no improvement in that necessary, you can think of to what extent you can compensate. And I think in that sense, responsible innovation can be a very interesting perspective. Because if you compensate for your CO2, which is emissions when you take the flight. If you compensate, there are trees planted somewhere else, or not even the trees are planted somewhere else, but somebody says we're not cutting the trees, and therefore you're compensating. And it makes, to me, it raises the question, why do other people somewhere else have to plant trees for an action you do somewhere when you fly from Amsterdam to Berlin? Why do there need to be trees planted in the Amazon or in somewhere in Africa? So in that sense, there's also a matter of responsibilities and how that links people from different locations all in the world together. And compensating for your flight then is not a technological innovation, but is some kind of institutional innovation. And it's also a change of relationships between people, who are totally distant from each other. So I want to come to my question for the both of you. To what extent responsible innovation should then also look at much more social innovations or innovations where there is a change of social relationships, a change of institutions where there is no technology in that sense behind it? The example of the Fairphone is not a technological innovation at all. They do the same as all the other companies from a technological perspective, but it's more a business model innovation and a process innovation where they are sourcing ethically acceptable sources and inputs.
So you mean actually to say you can have innovations that don't involve any kind of technology, which are strictly social in a way? It's about relationships between people, between countries, between groups, actually.
To what extent responsible innovation can give interesting insights in.
I completely agree with you, and I think the whole program. I hope at least that's made clear also in the call and the projects that we see around. Clearly, also draw attention to these institutional, these organizational, the business models, the incentive structures. So. I mean, we are all working, I assume we're working with a very generous conception of what technology is. Technology is not just the device or the component or the system. It's the systems of systems, and it gives the institutional framework or the social context or the way people deal with it is part and parcel of the object of our analysis and design. You cannot just say, well, I'm designing this component and I leave out of consideration all of the rest. This talking about windmills or about waterworks or IT. Everything is about systems of systems, more and more so. So and so that's a hybrid beast. It's a beast that it's comprised of social and technical and organizational and economic and psychological elements, and that makes it so incredibly interesting. The reason why we started to think about technology is that in many social innovations, by the way, we can also talk about conceptual innovations or mathematical innovations. It's just innovation indicates that we have something surprisingly new, a new piece of functionality that we add to the world that wasn't there before, that as a result of our creativity we introduce to the world and allows us to do certain things better or differently or things to do that we couldn't do before. That's the whole thing about innovation. But the reason why we started to think about technical innovations is that many of those innovations in the 21st century will start or at least have that very tangible material standard, in a standard sense, technological component in it. It will have the windmill, the cable, the IT, the software, the computer hardware, etc. And so from there, you can think about how are we configuring this and how should we make it in such a way that it has this overall functionality that we desire. And why do we desire that? Because it hopefully gives us some solutions to our grand challenges. And so that's what we want. And so time and again we have to see whether actually we're producing, when we put these systems of systems or these socio-technical systems in place, we are actually producing what we hope to get out of it. So that's my answer to it.
Yeah, and to get back to the point of the airplane, in my opinion, we should not compensate for anything, but simply make cleaner airplanes, which can be done. There are some ideas on that level, which will take a lot of time. But for instance, there was a study here in Holland to imitate the bird flight of a swallow into a prototype of an airplane, and by moving the wings, you could reduce the amount of fuel needed by 30%, which is a huge innovation. If it ever sees the light of day, that will be a tremendous change. And it started not with the plane makers, but it started with the bird watchers, actually. So that's a different line of thinking, which I think can be very promising, and also shows that you don't have to just be negative about our way of living, but you can also improve. The question, of course, being, is there enough time? Because climate change is going very fast. You said something about...
I just want to say, just to see the analogy. 50, 60 years ago, finance in all kind of enterprises was a kind of staff department, because they do nice things, and at the end of the day they have to count all the beans. Nowadays, it's a member of the board. If you talk about quality, 30, 40 years ago, you have a staff department about quality. You said, okay, that's nice, we should have a little bit of quality. But now we are aware that quality is line business, so it's in the board. If you talk about societal way of innovation or entrepreneurship, in a lot of companies, it's still a staff component, and they need it as a kind of license to operate. But at the end of the day, it will develop in a way that is the member of the board. Everything should be integrated. So related to your question about innovation, innovation is not only because we have a positive positive cash flow, the netto contante waarde, but we're talking about that the quality is all right. But then you also should ask at the end of the day the question, is this something what society is needed? And then you're not talking about, but that's my personal view, not talking about does it have any added value to a certain group in the Netherlands. No, you should talk about the view, what is from a world perspective an added value. And then you are especially raising all the issues you are pointing at. What's the relationship between planting a tree because I'm flying? What are the insights behind it? And then the other way, please be practical and not talk about only studying, but also doing the right things.
You talked about the difference between the different kinds of science. We have a lot of philosophers here, for instance. I studied history, and I came across people like you that studied physics, and they said, what do you do, history? Is that on the university? So there seems to be a distance between the, let's say, hard science and the soft science. How do you get the technicians to listen to the philosophers? How do you get them to feel that they actually need to listen to those other people?
You said in the beginning, clash.
There has to be a clash of interest.
Clash or seduction. That are the two things.
Jeroen. Clash or seduce them. Well.
Yeah, I can open a little bit more, but anyway. Huh?
Jeroen, how do you think that you get to because you're a philosopher working at a technical university, so you're an expert on this.
Yeah, I mean, well, the student's expert, I don't know, but I mean, many of you are associated or affiliated with academia, and you will have noticed that you don't need to talk for a long time to students to convince them that they, especially applied sciences or engineering or that they can do a great job, that they can help a lot of people, make the world a better place. And I'm putting this intentionally in these kind of more lofty words, because people really feel that students have this idea that there are a lot of problems and they can be part of the solution to them. So that's the positive part. And so, for example, in Delft, students are queuing up to do a third world country or developing technology, a frugal innovation project. So they want to go over there and live there for a time and contribute. So that's a positive part. There's also a negative part. That's the clash, probably. And this is when applied scientists or engineers are gung-ho and they want to realize their project, and then they hit the brick wall of what people think, and not only the women, but people have values. They have certain ideas, and we need to understand, how they, what their opinions are. but also how these opinions may change because of the underlying values they have. Because sometimes we may be just confused. You know, when you 10 years ago or 20 years ago, you would ask someone, say, what kind of car would you like to drive? Well, SUV would be an option. Now that is just a petrol guzzler, and it's and you're ridiculed. You cannot drop off your kids at kindergarten with an SUV. So they've changed their ideas because, and this is a real problem for the social science perspective, and this is the reason why we need applied science, social science, and the humanities, because that helps you to a critical resource of questioning what people actually say when they have to fill out the questionnaire. They say, oh, I want this, I want this. This is something that you may want now. And you say on this page, you say that you want that. And on that page, you say that you want something else. Hey, that seems to be inconsistent. So you need the critical resources to question what and that's the economists refer to that as adaptive preferences. We may be under the spell of the latest, gadgets or craze, but that's not something that is good for the planet or that is good for future generations. So this is the reason why the humanities kick in, and it is exactly the teamwork between the applied science and engineering, the social science of understanding of how people deal with it, what they feel about it, how they will use it, and these kind of basic values that will serve things that we have in mind on a very abstract level, and that the three need to go hand in hand, and that's exactly what the Responsible Innovation Program is enhancing and stimulating by requiring people who submit for funding, submit a proposal for funding, require that all the three components need to be there, and they need to be there in a believable way. It's not just if I gave a phone call to a colleague across campus who happens to be a social scientist or a philosopher, but these people really need to show that they are working on a solution, and this is the tangible part of it, come up with a design that when introduced will change the world for the better.
Now let's make it very practical, because you're the head of the top sector of energy. You need to make a bridge between society, science, and the companies. You get you got an amount of money to spend on this project. How much is that?
We started with 2.5 million, but the idea is also that it will be for 30 to 50% added with 2.5 million from business. So totally 5 million.
So there you are. You have this mission. You have 5 million. What do? Who do you call? Where does your day start? Who's the first person you're talking to? How do you spend that money? How do you get? Who is society anyway? Who do you talk to?
Do we have till 7 o'clock or not? No. Now, to make it very practical, we started just by doing. So we went to a few businesses. We went to some technical persons, say, what are problems? And come up with some projects. So we started the first year when we have only 1 million with a few projects. These projects will be judged by top scientists. So it should be from the right quality. And a few examples are, for example, no, that makes it a too long story. But the next step is how we can make it more structural. So we said there are 2 pillars on our program. One pillar is do some societal research. Understand what are the triggers why people should support or resist changes in society. And that could be related to the not in my backyard elements, the elements of a consumer buying things or not buying things, or a medium-sized company, why should they behave? That's one element, doing just societal research. The other thing is doing more targeted research projects. And the third element is try to get this knowledge discussed with all kinds of technical persons who are doing research, and in this case, seduce them to use the science, I hope not make a mistake, social scientists and humanity scientists, scholars, to work together. And that's, for example, the 1st of October, we will organize a big congress, also with the support of NWO, met MWI-programma, to have a first more scientific way of showing results, but also involving people to work together. That are the 3 pillars. And the first element is, the fourth element is, try to get more people involved. So I'm not the head of the top sector energy, but I'm one of the members of the boards in it. But I try to get all the other top sectors, because the problems of having new infrastructure has also to do with chemistry. The chemical has also to do with agriculture. So why not getting the whole innovation element of the Ministry of Economic Affairs involved in these kind of things? And in fact, the top sector is focused on from now till 5 to 7 years. But if it's a more longer horizon, I'm looking to Jeroen and the others and see what is NWO doing. So that's also having alignment on the programs, on the focus, because then we can better work together and see that the elements of the research done on the MVE program could be also presented to people who are working for innovations on the shorter term noticed. And that are the kind of things which I'm working on.
So actually your program gains weight and importance if you get to work along with other groups like this one, for instance.
Yeah, especially. And that's I call it a kind of, how do you call it in English, an olievlekwerking. And then of course bio-oil. Yeah.
So you're hijacking the project a bit for your own project, and in the end for a better world. So it's
now the word hijacking is not in my vocabulary. What I try to is also seduce and combine and bridge and be a little bit on the background, because other people should do it. I'm not in charge of doing it.
You're facilitating.
Yeah, facilitating, trying to inspire people to do these steps and building bridges.
Does anyone have any questions at this point, please?
I have two kinds of questions. When I was listening to you, there's a lot of compensation discourse. So the social sciences come in to convince, to seduce, to compensate. What is their voice, and what would happen if they tell you, we don't want windmills. Windmills are maybe not the solution. What would then happen to the energy sector if we would not agree? That's the first question. The second question is, when you were asked what your problem was, you said, oh, I go and speak to the people from the technology, etc., and then I go and speak to the social scientists, etc. So there is a deeply built-in order of things that first comes the technological, and if there is repair work needed, then come the social sciences, and they should convince and tell you how you can get your stuff into the households, convince the wonderful women who have all the power apparently in this society.
Now, this message comes clearly across, I think.
Which is obviously. And I wanted to draw your attention that big companies like Mercedes-Benz or any others, they have whole departments of social scientists and of humanities scholars to exactly manipulate whole societies. So I think the dichotomy is not about the technological and the social, but what is our common project? Do we want to have critical technology developers, and do we want critical social scientists? Because it's not any social scientist and it's not any technology developer we need. We need really different kind of minds. And I think that's, for me, the most important thing. And I would like to have your ideas about that. Thank you.
Could you say something about what you are thinking about different kind of minds?
Different kind of minds is that I do not start as a technology developer saying that I will bring the solution which is just a smarter technology. But right from the beginning think that my technology is only a little part of the puzzle, and maybe be then less hubristic in the sense of thinking that the solution is necessarily a technological one. Maybe we travel in interesting ways too much. Maybe we think it's good to be everywhere. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe it is the problem. And not to say, oh, I can, for example, Austrian Airlines, I book my flight and then they ask me €7 if I want to compensate for my CO2 use. I find this is kind of unethical to the end, to make me think that I can compensate by paying €7 for flying across Europe. So I think this is an unethical way of being ethical. So I'm just curious about that. So that's why I think I would like to see different minds in the technology. And I know people who kind of really engage in this. So it's not just but I think really it's not the good social sciences that repair that and the bad technology. I don't think like that. I think we need different technological developers, and we need new generation of people who think differently.
Thanks for sharing your view. Listening with my heart to your words, I first of all I like to embrace you, because you're pointing exactly where it's all about. it's not like I have a technology and how can I sell this technology? Or the other way around, I know as this is my ethical value and everyone should behave according to these values. It should be an integration of the two of them. And the only way to get this done is at the end of the day, a different mindset. You're talking about, 50 minutes ago, about truth. What is truth? If you talk about truth...
you have till 7 o'clock.
Yeah, no, my point is, I'm as a physicist, I'm educated in a kind of physical truth. But I realized physics and metaphysics is close to each other. So I realized in my second year that physics is nice, but it's only this part of. So I got the kind of education to see that physics is an element of a total. And my main message, which I did it at the TU Delft, so don't. But my main message was not getting at the university directly, that I should align to other people. What are their things? What are their way of looking to reality, to environment? So I completely agree to your element. It's all about a different mindset. But how to get there is, first of all, start people working together. Sometimes clashes, sometimes seduction, sometimes building together experiences, get enthusiastic, that kind of things. And sometimes, just failures. But then share the failures with each other and come... Because at the end of the day, people should have kind of experience that it's really attractive to work together. But then you go to more other things where you probably know much more about it from a philosophical or a psychological element. Then you talk about what are egos, how do you work with egos, how you get egos together. Now, anyway.
There was a question from there, and then I'll get to your question.
Yeah, it's related to... My name is Pankaj Saxena. I live in India, but I'm working at Maastricht University here in the Netherlands. And my question is related to the point that was just made. And it's a little more fundamental, I would think, and I've been kind of trying to understand the discussion that's going on. And at some point, one of you mentioned development and the path to development and the need for development. So I'm just wondering whether there's a possibility or a discussion on what development itself is. Because, for example, in the energy kind of context, I'm also talking from an Indian perspective, growth in energy consumption is a non-negotiable. We don't discuss. So it's all about how do you produce more energy and sustainably and more environmental friendly kind of energy. But the question of can we actually reduce energy consumption is not there anywhere in the discourse at all. Because a windmill, perhaps, is a form of creating energy in a different kind of a way, which has all kinds of environmental and other implications, which somehow get completely covered under. So the question of a more fundamental nature of whether we just should have, in the case of energy, less energy consumption, and not look for ways of producing more energy in ways that are perceived to be more environment friendly. So is that, because then it's not a technical or technological question at all. It's a far more fundamental question. And
you're actually asking who sets the agenda before we start innovating and ask the technicians for a solution. Let's be clear about the problem.
That the agenda is actually the second part of the question in that sense. Yeah. No. Can we even ask that question whether we want, or should we have more energy, or should we be consuming more energy? Which is not about agendas, and then how that more energy is created is the agenda, I would assume. But yeah.
Jeroen. No, I agree, and also with some of the critical remarks that have been made, that this responsible innovation seems to be open to the criticism that you're starting with the technology. It's always geared towards what the engineers can come up with. I think that is a slightly a misconception, because that's why it's important to understand that we start from the grand challenges. It starts with, what are our main problems? And then we'll see whether there are clever technical solutions or socio-technical solutions or socio-techno-economical, cultural, psychological solutions to solve that problem. But it's, as I said in the beginning, there is no guarantee that there is such a silver bullet. It may just be the solution may be to change our way of behaving. That could well be. Often we find that we can And this is also why it's important to make a kind of a moral analysis up front and to say, well, actually growth, what is the value, what is driving growth in economic growth in many cases, is this that it's prosperity, it's to increase the well-being of people, to have more wealth to distribute to people, to give them a better life, or to give them more capabilities, to talk in terms of sense approach. So these are jobs and employment and the betterment of lives of individual people is on the table. That's one thing. But there's also safety and security and privacy and sustainability on the table. So it's not as simple. We can, of course, pretend that it's a simple story and just focus on one of those values. No, of course, we are obliged by all of those values. And we just have to see whether we can come up with those clever solutions. If they're not there, we should give up on it and change and look for radically different types of solutions. So that's one thing I wanted to say. I want to also say something to your comment on the social science perspective, which we see a lot of it now. I mean, Cameron and many of the politicians have nudging teams. So there's an incredible advanced and rapidly expanding science of nudging, which is psychological social science, which is just it's an advanced manipulation, and so it's used to manipulate large numbers of people into using this or moving in this direction or moving in that direction. This is why it's so incredibly important to have this critical resource like the humanities can offer. That can help us to criticize what is happening over there, or what we are buying into, if we buy into a certain type of products or a particular type of infrastructure that comes with a whole kit and caboodle. So this is crucial. Otherwise, we will be just off to a bad start.
Yeah, you had a question there at the back.
Thank you very much. My question is actually related to what Professor Veld just mentioned, the role of social scientists, how we want it to be, as Professor van der Hoven just summarized, but how it is right now in reality among many industries is the way that Mr. Wagenaar just summarized, which is there is a technological development and there is a social sciences that needs to just make sure that it is going to be accepted among the society. And this is exactly how different partners also in these kind of collaborations do refer to social scientists and humanities scholars. The phrase also mentioned today that when it comes to acceptance, you need the social sciences, we need you. That's exactly the kind of perception, the misguided perception, I do agree with you, the misguided perception that does exist. And it's actually a pretty strong image, a pretty strong misguided perception, which does affect our work, because many of us who have worked with industry partners have come across one way or the other that misguided perception that we are being considered as the one who is going to make it acceptable or who are going to tell them how to develop the technology that is accepted, which is understandable from an industry perspective because at the end of the day, that's their business. But this misguided perception, which is also very strong, is also affecting the way we are doing business and is also included in the way the financing mechanism of these kind of approaches, the MVI, the responsible innovation approaches of NWO are being based on. So my question would be, how do you think that we could come out of this impasse? How do you think that this stalemate could be overcome, both among the partners who are doing this, the research, but also more broadly, societally speaking, the role of social sciences and humanists in technological developments?
Evolution and revolution. Revolution has a lot to do about are there what I would call tipping points where people who are in charge of certain things in society realize I've made a big mistake by not using in the beginning people with your disciplines. For example, I don't want to make it bigger at the moment. If you see what's happening now in Groningen related to the gas discussions, people who I'm talking with, they realize we have made a big mistake. And that's what I would call kind of tipping point. But the other element of tipping point is that also you should see these chances and grab them. So at the moment, who of you is now talking to Hans Alders, for example? who is calling him, please Hans, we invite you for a conversation because you are now at the moment in charge to get things solved in Groningen. And we have a different perspective and we are challenging you. That's the typical, what I would call the element of revolution. And there are a lot of tipping points where you can see it. And the other thing is evolution. And that means, she's now just leaving the room, but the element what she was saying, the element of bridging, open the doors, go to others, and not being sent away by, please make it acceptable, by saying, no, that's not why I'm in charge. I'm in charge of talking with you. What's the best way of working together to get different mindsets? And that's one of the balls which is in your room to get things changed. And then the evolution is just the element of having the same successful experience or failure experiences together. Then you're working together, get an understanding of each other. And one of the things, in fact, we are doing in our responsibility is from the innovation point of view, bringing with money or with inspiration or by setting agendas, people together exactly on the same level that you are together working on seeing what are the challenges and solving it together.
Okay, thanks.
Is this boring or am I wrong?
No, you're right. I think we've come to the end of this.
Last point.
Okay, one last point, please.
Yeah, I think the fallacy in the discussion here is this: that on the one hand you can presume beforehand what acceptability entails, and that was what Ben was talking about, right? We already know what we think is acceptable, and then social scientists should be brought in to ensure that that will be the case. But you can also, in the process, make part of the process, reflect on what acceptability entails for a specific innovation. And then the role of social scientists becomes much broader and critical.
Okay, thanks for that last remark. I think we should... I'm sorry?
No question? Yeah, do you have a question? Fine.
Yeah.
Perhaps I'm allowed to ask one last question, because you said, well, within the STEM program of the Topsector Energy, we started just with a lot of projects. Within the MVI program, which we are running since 2009, we have about 50 new research projects. So yesterday we presented the 17 that have been granted this year. So this seems to be a quite successful start, or it's not mainstream yet. But my question is, this is all happening at NWO, this is all happening within the Topsector Energy. You just said, well, I'm talking about with the other top sectors, but what is the strategy to bring this one step further? And one step further is perhaps bringing this to the government, or bringing this at the European level, so that they also feel this is very important for us to innovate in a responsible way. Can you reflect a little bit on this question?
Well, I can give you an example, very practical, concrete example. I've recently been asked to chair a committee by the Minister of Economic Affairs on privacy and big data. And that's of course an incredible, large and difficult topic. But actually, in discussing this with the civil servants that are supporting that, and with the staff of the minister, we came in a natural way to think of this, a responsible innovation line where we would like to utilize all the knowledge and wisdom and information that big data can help us to get a better understanding of how society works, and also to help us solve some of the large problems. But of course, without the privacy and security drawbacks. So use the functionality, because we have we're under a moral obligation to do a better job in solving crimes and crowd control and all of these things. But without these privacy problems. Same with the smart meter. The functionality of the smart meter without the privacy drawbacks. So come up with a smart design. And that is not simply a cryptographic solution. That is also as we know, security is to a large extent about the data governance and the incentive structures of that you put in place, the laws and regulation that you put in place, the self-regulation mechanisms that IT industry adopts. So that is a whole package, a socio-technical system of enormous proportions. But we need to think about the design of that, or else we will be, struggling for a long time with this problem. So this is an example of how you could bring this to the level of policymakers and politicians that will see the potential of this idea, because it's a straightforward and simple idea. The other thing is that just to see how it will be picked up outside of Europe, and we already have good evidence that people outside of Europe, we're dealing with a consortium of 8 technical universities in China, for example, and Tsinghua, one of the biggest universities, most important universities in China, is among them, how they can incorporate this idea of responsible innovation in the curriculum for applied scientists and engineers in China. We're talking about millions and millions of engineering students being educated along these lines. This is, and they're just explicitly referencing this MVI or this responsible innovation idea. So that I think that in itself, in and by itself, is a huge success, and I think we will see more of that in the near future.
Jasper, I think there are a lot of opportunities, but based on my journalist leading this discussion, from history, how is finance coming from a staff department to the board? How is quality coming from a staff department to the board? How is responsible societal behavior coming to the board? There are a lot of different ways to get this done. And there are special roles for NGOs, there are special roles for politicians. And one of the things which I like, what we are now doing, is we started with a group like you, telling the story, and everyone should pick it up. Kijk, from my point of view as an NGO, I'm going to the other role, is very practical. There is a business argument, or a business instrument, I would say, by purchasing. If you build infrastructure, you can get a maximum of 10% discount on your bid if you are doing the right things from a sustainable point of view. One of the elements in this criteria is that you should have at minimum 2 times a year discussions with critical NGOs about your sustainable behavior and your sustainable initiatives, your sustainable innovation program. That means at the end of the day that it's also the responsibility of myself and my colleagues to have a certain level of being very critical. That's an element. And so you see a direct relation to business, because if you don't do this kind of things, you miss 2% of the 10% discount, if you do these kind of things. And of course, what we are saying, we are not having a kind of secret discussions in boardrooms. No, you should make it public what's discussed. One element. I can tell a lot of different elements where you see all these kind of things. Please spread the news by doing it.
Thank you very much. Those are great last words, I think. Thanks everybody for being here over the last 2 days, and I hope you'll be seeing each other again somewhere next year. And there'll be drinks downstairs, and well, thank you all very much.
Have fun.